My name is Alissa Walker. I'm excited to be the third portion of the Ban Cars panel for this morning session. Where's my advancer? Here? Is this how I do it? All right. Alissa Walker is my real name. You can ask my dad. He's here, Tom Walker, to confirm. I'm a pedestrian advocate and urbanist who lives in Los Angeles. I actually do walk in LA, the poster child of everything that's wrong with the previous presentations today, and where a lot of these projects are already being proposed. Uber had its Elevate conference there earlier this week, as we've all discussed, and we are a very good candidate for a lot of these solutions. But today, I'm going to be talking about what's happening on the ground, mostly because when I watched the Jetsons, I was always wondering what was happening on the ground. Did they ever show it? Did they ever tell us? Did we ever know? So as I mentioned, I live in LA. I've been covering these issues, transportation, urbanism, policy, a lot of the stuff that the previous panelists have spoken about. For the last 15 years or so, I try to walk everywhere if I can, take a bike, bus, or train if it's a different option. And I'm also a mom. And I want you, we're a multimodal family. We're that family that, the previous speakers were talking about. We try not to get in a car. Even rideshare, which is actually kind of difficult to take with your kids because you have to bring car seats, right? So I want you guys to think about me as your customer, my family. We live in a mixed income neighborhood in LA, a very dense neighborhood. We like to take transit if we can, but we would love a different option if there was a way that we could get through our congested city safely and sustainably. So as an urbanist, I'm all about the Jetson slides here, so just be prepared. As an urbanist, we get asked a lot, what is my vision of the city of the future? What do we think the city of the future should look like? And this is my vision for the city of the future. This is Los Angeles in 1900. You can see this multimodal street that we've been talking about. There's everything from streetcars to wagons, there's some bikes, there's people walking. There's not this monoculture that we've been talking about. There probably are maybe a few cars, I don't know, maybe like the visionaries, the Elon Musks of their time in LA had their electric cars back then. But there's people who are sharing the street, negotiating the street, moving at speeds that are appropriate to be able to walk across the street without fearing for your life. Here's another shot of Pasadena around the same time, downtown Pasadena. You can see the dockless bike share along the side there. There's people mixing and even talking in the middle of the streets, right? There's me with my kids getting through the city. Electric scooters, even back then, would you believe it? And then to get further distances, you went to the high-speed rail station nearest to you and got further away. And then here's where you guys come in. You guys are doing short air-based trips, right? Where appropriate. So I don't usually put this slide in when I talk about this. I added you guys in because I'm really interested in seeing, this technology was around 100 years ago before cars. You have to think about it this way. So if we eliminate the cars and go back to, the origins of your industry, maybe we can work together is what I'm thinking. So obviously our priorities changed over the last century plus. I don't need to go into that. These are the two charts that keep me up at night as an urbanist. One is that pedestrian deaths are skyrocketing over the last few years. And I don't probably need to talk about the climate change one, but the fact that transportation emissions are surpassing the other types of emissions that we're generating. Do you guys know about Vision Zero? Can you raise your hand if you're aware? So your city might have one of these policies in place. These are all cities across the country, and there are probably more now, that have committed to ending road fatalities in their cities by a certain date. It might be 10 years from now. And in LA, many cities, we actually have a really disheartening amount of data that's showing us how pedestrians and people on bikes are getting killed at a higher rate than they have been over the last 10 years. So we're using this data-driven approach to go out and make physical changes to the roadways that are making it safer for people to get around. And then the other approach to this that you might have, your city or your mayor might have signed on to is these mayors are agreeing to adapt the Paris Climate Accord within their own city, even though the country backed out of the agreement. And a few cities are going even further and declaring this fossil fuel streets designation for some of their streets. This can be through congestion pricing, some other stuff that we can talk about later. So this is my take on the 3 revolutions. This is what I want. 0 deaths, 0 emissions. And a lot of people, I go to places and give this talk, and they're like, well, that could never happen. That's impossible. And I was like, well, it's easy. Get rid of all the cars. And I think it's great that you guys both brought it up, because I usually walk into places and people think I'm crazy for proposing this. But just imagine what happens when I'm a person like that and I see an article like this. This is like urbanist, like rage, like our mind starts to blow open and we can't even handle. You've brought all these problems of cars to our cities. Now you want them to fly? What? And this is the bigger problem. And I'm going to talk also about how what you guys are doing is perceived by the industry, particularly skeptical journalists like myself, and how we can maybe get past some of these problems. Because if it's something like this that most people are going to read in the New York Times, in the weekend paper, for example, or these 3 lies, blatant lies, like this was from a couple of years ago, but like, it's ready for takeoff. You can own one. It's almost here. You know, we read these articles and it just gets everybody worked up about these different problems that we're getting delivered to our cities. So one argument made by my colleague at The Verge was we need to stop using this word. This is a big challenge for, I think, a lot of industries where the public grabs onto something and we need to move them towards something else. So this is just from hearing you guys talk over the last few days and seeing some of the coverage, this is my very official rating for some of these terms and how they're being perceived by the public. Flying car, not gonna work. Aerial taxi, doesn't sound very fun, sounds kind of boring. Urban air mobility, I don't really know what that means if I'm a member of the general public. But if you say sky transit, I think that could go somewhere with the urbanists. I think people are warming up to that idea. So I asked some of my urbanist friends about these terms, and these are the responses they gave to me. I'm like, what do these things mean to you? Super positive, as you can say. Many of them had these fantastical, ideas, things like the Jetsons, Disneyland, a little less stupid than tunnels, a thing the tech bros tried to invent. Is that like a gondola? And then, of course, hell, ringing endorsement. And this was a longer comment that I thought was actually, we needed to put it on its own slide. Sounds like a potentially interesting idea with limited applications that politicians will stupidly put too much stock in and urbanists will smugly denounce without understanding. Nailed it. And this one I thought is also important for you guys to know. This is what a lot of people think. An expensive distraction from more practical solutions. That's a lot to overcome. So Salita Reynolds, who's the general manager of LADOT, she spoke at Uber Elevate earlier this week, and I thought what she said was so good from the city's perspective. If our mobility future looks like today, but the cars fly, we have failed. And I'll argue we already made them fly when we put them on flyovers that go like miles through our city and cutting through neighborhoods and changing the way that we move around our city in a very substantial way. So I'm going to offer you some lessons from some of the coverage I have of, I told you, the Jetsons art is good. There's a Jetsons art for everything. I'm going to offer you some lessons from what I've covered over the last few years so you can see how the public grabs a hold of these ideas and then the urbanists get really angry about it and then problems are caused with what you want to talk about. So there's a lot of skepticism, if you might want to say, about these hyperloop companies. There's 2 main ones who are kind of in this build-off right now, these companies trying to build this type of transportation solution. And the public perception, I think, among urbanists is that they're going to all these different cities and trying to sell them on this idea, which is true. They built an app where you could book your tickets even though it doesn't exist yet, so you can type in all your destinations. It'll tell you how much it'll cost and how long it'll take and when it's leaving, but you can't actually go. And then they've really ignored what's the biggest challenges of any of these things, but Are you really going to tell me that you're going to go into the Central Valley of California and convince someone that's been against high-speed rail for all these years that you can put this in their backyard, that completely untested technology that looks kind of ugly? I don't think so. And then they brought us all out into the desert outside of Nevada to give us their Kitty Hawk moment, and you guys should be really mad that they took that away from you because that is really unfair. But they're saying this Kitty Hawk moment where they just propelled a sled at 70 miles an hour using an electric motor, and as far as I can tell, it wasn't really that revolutionary at all. They've gotten it to go a little bit faster, but it's not as close to the 700 miles an hour that they promised us. Not saying they're not going to get there, but don't bring a bunch of journalists out to the desert to show them that it goes 70 miles an hour. So there's 2 Hyperloop systems that are in development right now for commercial travel. They say they're both in the United Arab Emirates. We don't know much more than that, but they have a really cute pod because Richard Branson invested in one of the Hyperloop companies, so it will look like Virgin Airlines, but a tube goes somewhere. We don't know. So for me, this is how I've come around to it. It's a great use for shipping cargo. And I bet people say that to you guys too sometimes. Oh, it's a great idea for getting goods, for goods movement. Great idea to get things around a city, but I wouldn't ride in it. So let's use Hyperloop as maybe one example to learn from as you're going forward. The other one is Uber, unfortunately. And I know that a lot of the talk has been about Uber and its conference earlier this week, and I know probably some of you are working with them. Someone from Uber may well be here, but I need to give you the background from the urbanist perspective about why Uber is problematic for cities. Uber's big promise, and other ride-hailing companies, not just Uber, but Uber's big promise was that car ownership would go down and people would drive less because they were using other people's cars to get around. We know that traffic is worse now because of TNCs. Uber has not been good at sharing, Uber specifically has not been good at sharing its data with cities who are trying to plan transportation changes based on how people are choosing to move. So if ridership is down and Uber's not sharing its data, that could be a big contributor to why these cities can't be nimble enough to make changes. And then the self-driving crash, which happened a few weeks ago. And I don't need to go into too much detail here because we don't know yet. They haven't released all the information about the investigation. But it's pretty clear that there were some shortcuts taken when it comes to safety, and that it may even be that the software was programmed in a way that calibrated seeing a pedestrian and not reacting fast enough because that didn't matter. So these renderings that came out this week, and I love Star Wars, these renderings that came out this week showing some of these, I don't know what you're supposed to call them. Oh, Skyport, right. That doesn't look like the future that I want for my city. First of all, because it just built over the freeways. It didn't really change the way that what we do with those freeways or how our behavior is changing. And I'm pretty sure like all those people getting there are not going to be using Uber's vehicles that are shared and pooled. I'm just not a big believer in the way that this rendering looks right here. Here, this is supposed to be a place in LA where they've actually widened the street, and of course, there's no cars in it right now. There's no congestion, of course. They've actually added more lanes to these streets, and that's not what we should be doing. We should be taking lanes away. This one is just the worst possible idea, and obviously, I mean, we're just taking a freeway bridge, and building something tall where I think they're parking cars higher into the sky, and we could put housing there or something where people could be living, so not a fan. So I wrote this after the crash, where the pedestrian was killed in Tempe, because I don't believe that Uber is a good partner in working for our cities, and I would prefer if Los Angeles personally did not work with them. So my final lesson, it was really hard to decide if Elon Musk should be Spacely or Cogswell. I went with Spacely. So you might have heard yesterday, his tunnel is open. Under Los Angeles, he dug a tunnel, and he's going to create a brand new transit system that's going to travel under Los Angeles. Sounds really familiar, like the subway we've been building for a really long time. So the tunnel is open for free rides, apparently. So I've written about this tunnel idea, which is literally the size of a car. It was actually built with a tunnel boring machine that was used to dig sewers. So it's a car sewer, basically, where cars are lowered down from the street level, and then they're moved again. All these sleds that are being propelled with electric motors, I guess. This is the new tunnel technology, whisks you around the city. So this idea has been poo-pooed roundly from urbanists and transportation planners. And Jarrett Walker, who's no relation to my family, but another great walker who writes about these issues, just explained that it's a geometry issue. We can't have cars being lowered into the street and going around the city in this way because it's just as bad as having freeways. So he tweeted this basic sentiment, and then Elon Musk literally told him, "You're an idiot." So he's listening. So I actually wanted to go see what this is about. They invited me to come see it. I was so excited to go see it. I told them some of my concerns. Here's me at 9 months pregnant getting a tour of the Boring Company's tunnel, car sewer. And I told them a lot of the things, my concerns, namely that the Green Line, our light rail line in Los Angeles, goes parallel to where they were digging a tunnel underneath the city. And I was like, you're kind of duplicating efforts here, right? And I'm worried about the experience for pedestrians or transit, people who rely on transit or people on bikes. So a few weeks later, they changed their whole strategy, and it said now they will prioritize walkers over cars. Not saying I had anything to do with that, but I'm going to take full credit that he finally listened to the walkers that had all been telling him that he needed to change the way his plan worked. So now it's this idea where the pedestrians and the cyclists can go in these little public transit-like pods, but we don't actually know where the tunnel's going still. So I thought this was great. Free rides through tunnel, but to where? We don't even know where we're going to end up, but the people can go for free underneath LA to an undisclosed location. Sounds like a great idea. So who's doing it right? I've said a lot of negative things, given some sarcasm about some things. Just quickly, I want to just show you some really good examples of what urbanists like, or maybe just me. Maybe this is my personal belief. We talked about self-driving cars, automated cars, what I need to start saying. What Waymo did, which is Google's self-driving car unit, broke out into its own company. Waymo started with families, and I really think that that is a really good way to introduce what you're doing, especially when it comes to this new and potentially radical, game-changing way of getting around a city. They started their program by going to families in the Phoenix metropolitan area and asking them, how do you need to get around? When do you feel like you are incapable of getting your kids to soccer practice, for example? I always love to talk about the dockless revolution that's awaiting us, the dockless scooters. Has anyone tried them? Have you rode a dockless scooter? Oh, right, good job. Yeah, so these scooters and e-bikes and regular bikes are being left out on streets. It's the perfect first mile, last mile solution. You could use it to get to your local air park, for example. But I will say for all the negative stories you might have heard about the way they're parked or people riding on the sidewalk, this is going to be what's going to dramatically change the way we get around our cities and replace cars in a way that makes these transportation options ubiquitous. And specifically, these are Ford's bike share bikes in San Francisco. They just added e-bikes this week, and I think they saw ridership go up by 30% just because people could get up those hills in San Francisco. So thinking about what's relevant to where you are. This is a project in Columbus, Ohio, which won the US DOT Smart City Challenge. I think they ended up winning about $60 million for this idea. And what DOT did was they had a big competition where they asked all the cities in the United States to submit a plan for how to use automated vehicles. 78 cities submitted ideas, and then they picked this as the winner. So something like that could be a US DOT project that would be a really cool use for a really cool way to get people to talk about how they would use your transportation. And specifically in Columbus, they're using AVs to help get moms to prenatal care appointments because it has one of the highest child mortality rates in the country. So using the technology for a really great solution, making sure people can get to their doctor's appointments as if they live in an area that's underserved by transit. And we talked a lot about density and its importance when it comes to building near the transit networks that we already have. A good solution would be to build more housing near places like air parks or our fixed rail system. And he didn't talk about another bill that just actually got completely decimated in California's Senate, which would have required cities to build a little bit taller along major transit corridors. And it got defeated for many reasons. Maybe it wasn't the perfectly worded bill, but we would like to see you guys help us figure out how to build more densely around your air parks, around existing transit networks, because we need that kind of advocacy to come from a different place. And I don't need to tell anybody about this. You guys have talked a lot about safety since we've been here. I'm very, very happy to hear. This is something where we need to be able to learn from you guys. This is, the commercial airline fatalities over the last 50 plus years. And I will say, if you come to join our urban mobility ecosystem in the city of Los Angeles, we want you to teach us to have no more deaths on our streets. You're part of the same network now. It's not a different thing. So if you could come to LA and be part of what we're doing and getting people around safely, and you could help us achieve our Vision Zero goals of 0 deaths and 0 emissions, that would be really great. So these are just 5 kind of bullet points that I put together that I'm hoping maybe we can use in the conversation to talk more about what we all hope that your technology can deliver for our cities. And this is always the slide that I end with, just to show that there is this multimodal, 0 emission, 0 fatality world out there waiting for us. And I'll see you soon on the streets, although I'll maybe see you also in the skies, and we can travel together through LA. Thank you.